Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Thomas. And thanks for joining this morning. As Thomas said, I'm Arun Banerjee. I'm the Cyber Risk Consulting Lead for Zurich Resilience Solutions. So ZRS, Zurich Resilience Solutions is the risk engineering division of Zurich Insurance. So we work with the underwriters, or we work with the underwriters to help them better understand risk. And we also work with the clients to help them mitigate the risk, understand the risk, and also mitigate the risk within their business environment. So globally, we are like 750 consultants, specialists who are providing different risk insights, thought leadership, consultancy for different clients. We work with clients across different sectors, which are like across different sectors for different solutions, from liability, climate change, supply chains, property, well-being, motor, operational resilience, and cyber. So today we are focusing on the cyber resilience topic. So cyber resilience, we internally, Zurich Resilience Solutions provides a lot of different services for our clients, things like cyber health check, cyber insurability checkup, cyber incident response planning, running cyber incident response exercises, business continuity planning, business continuity exercises, and different cyber bespoke services. But that's obviously not the complete length and breadth of different services which a client might require to mitigate their cyber risk or to manage their cyber risk. So that's why we have recently partnered with Barrier Network. So Barrier Network is a UK-based company and who is our trusted cyber partner, and they provide a lot of different services. Some of the things are like compliance services like certifications, security assurance services, managed security services, different incident response services. And one of the specialist service which they provide is cyber security for operation technology. So that's what we are focusing today. And I'm going to hand over to Jordan, who is the managing CISO for Barrier Network, to talk about operation technology cybersecurity.
Hello, and thank you. Thank you, Arun. So I've got probably the best part of this presentation today because it gets exciting. I mean, if you were going to write a movie, I would write a movie script about OT cybersecurity because it is evolving and developing so fast, and things that are happening are completely unexpected, even for cybersecurity professionals. That this is really quite exciting, and the trends that we're seeing are also very important to keep abreast of and know what you're defending against, because things are changing. And I rewrote about half of this presentation because there was a report that was released by the CSA and NSA in the States on OT cybersecurity, and it doesn't say anything I wouldn't have said myself, but coming from them, they are a little bit more authoritative. So I hope that I can provide a lot of value for here today, and I hope I don't scare you too much, but there's a lot of information that you really need to know in order to be prepared for what is out there. So the threats to OT and ICS environments are increasing, and they're getting very, very serious very, very quickly. And part of the problem in being able to present a lot of this data and this research is that a lot of companies keep this information to themselves for obvious reasons. So the information we have is spotty, but we do have some really, really good information from researchers that we can learn from. NCSC last year, joint advisory, they said that cybersecurity, that there is high impact ransomware incidents against critical national infrastructure organizations globally. The threat was so large that US, Australia, and the UK came out with this joint announcement in order to prepare people for this particular reality. And this year, IBM they do a yearly report, and they came out with this saying that 61% of incidents at OT-connected organizations last year were in the manufacturing industry. So if you are in OT and if you're in manufacturing, there is a target that is painted on your organization, and there are attackers that are seeking you out and seeking out your OT environment. And 36% of the attacks in OT-connected organizations were ransomware. And this is new and this is growing. We were looking at different types of attacks, but now it's growing, and the focus is getting to be on ransomware. This is a screenshot of the chart from that IBM report from this year, talking about the top 10 industries that are attacked. And for the first time, and was it 6 years, manufacturing beat out finance. So manufacturing and energy, and I've highlighted them here for you to make it easier for you to see because the numbers are small. And manufacturing and energy, manufacturing is number 1, energy is number 4, and they have been bubbling up in terms of that threat for a while. Manufacturing in 2019, manufacturing was the 9th most targeted industry that year. 2 years later, it was 4th. This year, it is now at the most targeted. And last year's analysis and research from IBM was that there was a 2,200% increase in the number of cybersecurity probes, hacking probes for OT specifically, which means that attackers are getting wise, they're getting knowledgeable, and they're progressing in their attacks. So why is OT and ICS a target? Why is this such a big and rich target area for attackers? And there's a really clear reason why. Originally, OT environments, industrial environments, they had no network. They may have had bespoke network or bespoke connections between the equipment and a PLC or some other controlling unit, but there wasn't this sense of network and connectedness, and certainly no connection to the internet. The other thing that that protected industrial environments was the fact that the equipment was inscrutable. It was bespoke equipment with bespoke controller protocols and processes. And if you wanted to do something bad to industrial system, you would need to get the manuals, a demo of that particular environment, figure it out, teach yourself, learn it, and then practice it and hope it somehow worked. And this was too much bother. So OT industrial environments was protected by the fact they weren't connected, and it was too difficult to figure out how to affect them. So if you were writing a movie script, and if you were writing a TV script, and you had the hero needing to stop the big bad evil machine, they didn't log in and try to issue shutdown commands. They just took a blunt object to it and break it. And that's the type of protection that we enjoyed for quite a long time. But things have changed. Now, our OT environments are connected, and they're becoming hyper-connected, not only to each other, but to the IT corporate network and to the internet. And we're getting great benefits from doing this, but with those benefits comes a risk. And instead of being inscrutable, we're now building our systems on top of well-known infrastructure because it's cheaper to implement, cheaper to develop, cheaper to deploy, but it also means it's a lot easier for attackers to then practice and figure out what needs to be done without needing special manuals, special equipment, or specialized knowledge. You can figure it out and learn it in the comfort of your own home. And this is creating this environment of increased threat. So this report that I was mentioning about the joint CSA-NSA advisory calls out specifically that traditional approaches to securing OT and ICS environments do not adequately address current threats. Even the traditional cybersecurity and the OT cyber approaches, they are not working against the modern threats. And this report also calls out that there is a multitude of tools that are readily available to exploit OT and IT systems. So what are the weaknesses that we see as barrier? We do OT assessments and industrial assessments across multiple different sectors, including energy and oil and transportation and shipping and marine. And we see a lot of non-compliance with OT and ICS security standards. So there are some standards that are out there. There's a lot that have been coming out this past year and a couple of years. But even 62443, we're not seeing that there has been this idea of compliance with these standards from the start. So security isn't baked in. We're seeing an over-reliance on vendors to secure the whole network. And this is a problem. We expect the vendors to come in and install their equipment and install their network and expect that to be secure. And that's okay, but we still need to double check their homework and have assurance on that. And the other problem is you have each vendor installing their own equipment in isolation of the rest. And then cybersecurity is more than the sum of its parts. How they connect and how the network is then supporting that infrastructure needs to be secure. And that we're not seeing is that step, that architecture step and that assurance step isn't being done, certainly not consistently. And under-resourcing of protection, monitoring, and training for cybersecurity in these environments. And this isn't just an OT problem. This is a cybersecurity-wide problem. But we're seeing this under-resourcing, and it's providing a challenge to being able to protect these environments. The result of all this, the combination of all this, is that there's blood in the water, and the attackers are in a target-rich environment, and they are looking for these environments because they're hackable. They're easy to knock over, and with ransomware, they can make a lot of money doing so. So what are these particular threats? I want to dive into just a handful of some very particular threats, and one is USB. The USB is really small, right? You think that they're not a big threat, but they're a much bigger threat and a much bigger risk than you realize. USB continues to be widely used in OT. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One, you've got disconnected or air-gapped environments. You need to be able to transfer information in and out. And the easiest way to do that is through USB. Not a question there. And USB is, and what I call sneaker net, walking the information from one network to another, is really, really common. Vendor updates can also come on USB devices as well, because they can't connect. If you've properly segmented your OT environment from the internet, they can't log in and do those updates, so they'll send it to a USB. And the other reason why USB continues to be used is that all efforts to try and stop using it have failed. So the U.S. Department of Homeland Security had a policy against all government agencies, no USB, we're just going to ban it outright. That did not last very long because USB is too convenient and too important to a lot of processes that exist. So what do we have? I'm not going to talk about Stuxnet because we're probably all very, very tired of hearing about Stuxnet. If you haven't heard about Stuxnet, and I feel really old, but we can have a conversation about Stuxnet later. That kicked off this whole USB OT cybersecurity threat in 2009 now. But let's say about 10 years ago, there's a famous story about a third-party technician in an energy company, and they had shut down their environment, and they were needing to upgrade their turbine control systems. And so he was taking his USB with the required files and the things he needed to do, and he was plugging it into each one of the turbine control systems to do the update. What he didn't know was that the USB he used was infected, and it transferred malware to each of those systems. And this short shutdown period for maintenance then got extended by 3 weeks. It took 3 weeks longer to bring this environment, bring these turbines back up after this event. And this was just a technician doing his job. This isn't a hack. This isn't someone trying to be malicious. This is just a technician doing their job using USB. And not having the appropriate controls meant a massive delay in a restart of the environment. A very embarrassing situation for Schneider Electric. 2018, they sent a supplier update on USBs, and they had to recall all of them because one of their third-party suppliers pre-installed malware onto the USBs that they used to put their security update on. So they had to recall all of them back. And late last year, and which is still becoming an issue this year, the emergence of something called Raspberry Robin. Now, this is a malware modular platform, and I'll get into that in just a second because that's where we are now, is modular malware, which was designed to be propagated using USB. So the idea is that they will the attackers will set up a website, and they'll make it look like a vendor's website or something that provides useful or a necessary tool for OT engineers. And they'll poison Google results so that as the engineer is Googling for a solution to their problem, the attacker's site with their malware will come up high in the search lists. And so, oh, that'll solve my problem. So they take that file, they download it to their USB, they then take it into work and plug it in their machines, and that's what starts this infection. And this is a concentrated, designed, focused attack on how this works and how to get into an OT environment, even though you've got these connections. So USB is the back door for a lot of malware to come into an OT environment. So being aware of that threat and being aware that USB is a growing focus for attackers is very important. And speaking of growing focus, Honeywell does this yearly report just on USB threat in OT. That's it. That's the report. It's a short report, but it's really interesting. They've been tracking these numbers for a while, and they keep on looking at new ways of looking at the information. But they capture malware in OT environments, and then they do an analysis on it. And the number of industrial-specific malware that they're catching is now up to 32%. 32% of the malware they catch in OT environments is OT-specific malware. They're also seeing a rise in malware that's designed for USB as a vector, not necessarily for phishing or phishing attachments or a direct network connection. They're seeing an increase in malware that's designed for USB, from going up by almost more than double in the past 2 years. And of that malware that they've captured in OT environments, 81% of that is now designed for disruption, not for espionage, not for spying, but for disruption. 81% of the malware that they find. And this is up from 60% 2 years ago. So these are very, very serious statistics and very serious trends that you need to be able to be aware of and have a plan for. And the report talked about the rise in readily available hacking tools for OT and IT. And there are researchers that track this specific thing. FireEye, this is a report that was done a year and a half ago. FireEye tracks these free hacking tools. In cybersecurity, there's always been free hacking tools that have been made available. They're very, very useful for people like me, like a CISO, to be able to test different things and different attacks and test and assess and assure on the security of an environment or a system. But these hacking tools are a double-edged sword. They also can be used by attackers. So a lot of these things are freely available. You can look them up and get them, so they're not necessarily hidden. And FireEye has been tracking this information. So this is freely available, easy to find hacking software. And they looked at ICS-specific malware. And this graph that's on here, this pie chart, is looking at the ratio of the different types of functionality in that malware. And this is this type of ratio that I saw in cybersecurity and IT about 15 years ago. So a lot of the work is done on the discovery bit, and then how to exploit software once it's been found. And in the terms of the arc of the evolution, this is that first step. And then if OT malware development progresses the same way as it did for IT, and there's no reason to think it won't, then what you start to see is more and more malware, ransomware, and more focused tools that come up and how to exploit that IT system. So we're seeing this cutting edge, this starting point in this evolution for the same types of problems we're seeing in IT. And since the year and a half since this has come out, I know for a fact these numbers have changed. And we're seeing a very rapid evolution because the attackers have learned from IT and they're just applying those learnings over into OT. And vendors there's no specific vendor that's being targeted, and there's no vendor that can hide. If there is a known problem within a particular vendor's equipment, it'll be found and someone will create a tool for it. So don't think these hacking tools are specific to any one particular system or vendor. Now, I told you I'd talk about modern ransomware as a platform, and that's this next threat and this last set of threats that I want to talk about today. We talked about free hacking tools in general, and we talked about USB. Now I talk about modern ransomware as a platform. A couple years ago, ECANS was flooding the news. It was a ransomware that was OT specific, and it made a lot of disruption, and it caused a lot of stir because it was so unique and innovative. It was the first major malware that gave us, like the security people and security researchers, a glimpse into where the attackers were and their maturity and their development. ECANS was designed to look for specific vendors' systems files, right, on a system, and be able to interact with them in specific ways. So this was huge. The fact that it knew and could understand a specific vendor system and how to interact with it was quite a shock and quite a surprise. The other thing is that it had some really unique functionality. One of the things that it did is it confirmed that it would be in the target company it was designed for. It wasn't broad spectrum. It wasn't infect everything and do all the bad things all the time. It was actually designed to target a specific company. You could change who that company was with a small configuration change. So this was interesting because it meant that the attackers assumed that they could spread the information. If they were attacking one company, they could spread their malware as widely as they could, as widely as they want to, knowing they would eventually get to their target. And so that was an interesting assumption. One of the things it also did is it turned on the firewall. That is not a typo in the slide. Normally, when malware gets into a system, it turns off security. This turned on the firewall. And the reason why it did this is because it wanted to isolate that system from the rest of the network. It turned on the firewall and blocked all connections, which meant that if you had a security team that could then notice the problem, they would then try to log in and try to protect it in real time. But with the firewall on, they couldn't. And so this proved a big problem for attackers. And then once it had turned on that firewall, it could then do its thing, do what it wanted to do, set itself up, and then it would stop processes for the OT systems, kill backups so that it couldn't be restored, and then encrypt files and then do this normal ransomware thing. So this was a lot of innovation that we hadn't seen, and this caused quite a stir across the industry. But let's talk about, that was ECANS, and that was a couple years ago. So let's talk about modern malware and OT ICS. And what's fascinating about modern malware and OCS is that it's starting to mirror very, very closely what we're seeing in IT. So there's a lot of crossover. So the things that we need to do in OT to protect ourselves, we can learn a lot from what we need to do in IT, and OT security is starting to need to look a lot like IT security, because of the principles and the foundations in play. They're completely different environments and there's completely different focus, yes, but we need to learn from and get inspiration from IT security in order to protect ourselves. Okay, so there was a specific attack that I'm calling out, but it is not unique in any way. It's just that we have a lot of information on it. It happened in January. The report from Kaspersky came out a couple months ago, and this was an attack across several Eastern European and Afghanistani industrial plants, design bureaus and research institutes associated with those industrial plants, government agencies and departments that were also part of the critical national infrastructure. And so this was a broad spectrum attack on a specific type of critical national infrastructure. Now, the outcome of this was espionage. Now, I want to make it really, 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 really clear that espionage, the fact that the end result was espionage, is incidental. Anything could have been that last step. So the fact that it's espionage doesn't mean, oh, whew, we're safe because it was just espionage. The fact that that's just what was chosen as the final tool at the end of the chain, it's purely incidental. So don't feel that you're completely safe, or these organizations shouldn't feel safe at all. So here is the timeline of what happened. It started off with a phishing email with a word attachment. Over 90% of these types of attacks, of these ransomware attacks, start with a phishing email and often with an attachment. That word attachment was infected, and it exploited a weakness, a vulnerability in Word that had a patch that was released 5 years ago. So it only got a foothold because the systems were, Microsoft Word was 5 years out of date. It hadn't been patched in 5 years. Once it got installed on the machine, it started gathering a whole bunch of information and then sent that information out to the command and control center, the attacker's home base. It also installed 6 different backdoors onto that system. This is new, and we haven't seen this before. Usually 1 or 2 backdoors are installed to make sure that the attacker can connect back in and continue doing what they're doing. 6 seems excessive, but this is what this was designed to do. A little surprising. After all this was done, it then started installing the modular hacking tools that the system and the human, the attacker, decided it needed for that environment and for that machine it was in. And this is what I'm talking about, malware being a platform, because you can then plug in whatever tools you need in order to accomplish your job at that particular time. It also makes it harder to detect because you're just installing a platform, not anything bad necessarily. So it's a little harder to detect. So with a combination of automated hacking tools and manual hacking tools connected to remotely from an attacker, then they start to spread throughout the entire network. They do network scans and start looking for other systems to infect. And if they find systems that are disconnected from the internet, this particular malware strain could turn itself into a proxy server, so that it could connect to these other systems and then connect to it directly, but through another infected system as a proxy. So it's almost using it as a router through the OT system and the internet in order to provide that level of access. It then would download password hashes and credentials and try to use those and gain access to servers, security servers, domain controllers, and all the other things that it could get its hands on. It then starts reducing the security controls, start turning off firewalls, which is the typical, and start shutting off antivirus, anti-malware, any other protections on the system, then start gathering that data. And in this particular strain, in this particular instance, it took that data and stole it and piped it out. It didn't have any other disruption at that point. At least it didn't have time to. So I would also want to highlight, I put that last square in amber to let you know and to remind you that the fact it was just espionage is merely incidental. Anything could have happened. At that point, ransomware could have happened, disruption could have happened, deletion of data could have happened, modification of the configuration of the PLC or the management system could have happened to affect how the industrial component was operating. Anything could have happened at that point. So by that point, the game's already over, and you need to know what to do. All right. Mitigations for OT and ICS cyber threats. This is all of these. I've rewritten my typical presentation. I've rewritten to quote this report that came out last week, because it's not saying anything I wouldn't say, but they're a lot more. The NSA is a lot more authoritative than I am, so we'll borrow their knowledge. Step one, limit the exposure of system information. You want to protect that data both at rest, the data that's on that system, and in transit as the data flows out of the system. Is it encrypted? Is it protected? Do we know what that data is? Securing your network and assets. And this is straight from Cybersecurity 101. Limit your internet exposed assets. Harden those assets. Make sure they're secured. Segment networks and zones. That's networking architecture 101 and has been so for 30 years. Make sure you've split up your networks into zones that the traffic can't go across, and then connect them with a DMZ. Use jump boxes when necessary to provide the remote access without direct remote access. If you have remote access that's necessary, like with vendors or with engineers, have a designed and architected approach to doing that. Patch. I know it's difficult. You can't just patch as soon as the patch comes out. I totally understand that, and that's a challenge for a lot of environments, but you should have a patch plan anyway, right? With whatever timescales you require. And then do secure configuration reviews. You've set it all up, or a vendor has set it all up, and you then need to review what that configuration is and whether or not that's secure for your environment. Keep everything up to date and in support. If you've got out of support or out of date systems, those need to be replaced or updated, and monitor security logs, right? Tools and scripts. We all use tools and various scripts in order to do the things that we need to do with these environments. We need to know what they are, and we need to limit them, and we need to remove what we absolutely don't need, because those things can be used as a platform and as a pivot point for attackers. They will exploit those as much as possible. So let's limit those as much as we can. And do security audits. This is really, really big. And this is what we don't see enough OT and ICS environments doing enough of. Validate all the connections that you've got. Validate the network. Validate that network design. Review the patching process. Is it appropriate, and are you doing it the way that you've designed it? confirm the security and storage of gold copies of tools, software, operating systems, so that you don't end up finding that there was, an infected tool or an infected piece of software that you're using that you just keep reinstalling and then keep creating a continual breach. Verify the removal of all non-critical software and services and tools. Has someone snuck something back into a system in order to do their job? Audit that full asset inventory. You think you know what you have, but do you really know? And how do you know? And how would you know if something changed? Do a deep dive into the security logs and intrusion detection system logs, because there might be things hidden under the surface that might not cause an alert, that might need to be investigated, and access the controls, assess your security controls against best practices. This is basic. And this needs to be done. And as we said before, one of the weaknesses is under provisioning, right? You don't have people to do it. You don't have that training to do it. And this is a problem across all cybersecurity. It's not unique to OT. It just has a bigger impact in OT because of the safety concerns and the environmental concerns that can result as a result of a problem in an industrial environment. So what do we do in barrier OT? We have a whole business unit designed for and dedicated just for OT, and we partner as a technology partner with Zurich for OT. And there are three things that we do. These three core things that we do. We do a lot more than these three things, but there's three core things that we do and things that we work with Zurich on. One, we can assess. We can assess your environments, and we can assess your risk, your security, your controls, and the things that you have in place to make sure it's according to your own standards, according to best practices, or according to industry standards that you might be required to comply with. And we can create that compliance gap or that risk gap so that you can then act on it. And we can then help with that design and the infrastructure and the architecture to make sure that you've got a good, secure foundation that you're building on top of, that your vendors are building on top of, to make sure that everything that happens within that environment is secure by default, by design, and right from the start. And that's what a industrial infrastructure and an architecture design can do for you. And then we can also provide that assurance, that ongoing operational assurance. And we have a managed security operations center where we can take a look at those security logs and have that live view of threats and things that are happening. We can provide security event alert monitoring to make sure to look at what's happening at the firewall, what's happening at DMZ. Is there strange traffic coming out because something has been infected? Is someone trying to break in? You can have that visibility. And one of the things that we can also deal with, we work with a variety of vendor partners, but we have Cisco CyberVision as a technology to provide OT-specific awareness of protocol traffic and systems to know what's happening live on the environment, so that you have an understanding of what's anomalous, what's normal, what's secure, what's not secure, and whether or not things are working and traveling and secured as intended according to the architecture and the infrastructure design. And that's what we do at Barrier to help equip and provide that level of assurance and peace of mind to industrial environments. And we work with, as I said, we've worked with manufacturing, energy, transport, and a variety of other OT environments. And it's always very fascinating. Like I said, we could write a movie on the types of things and types of threats and how fast things are developing. But it's important for you to take this on board and to take on these risks on board to make sure you are securing yourselves as well as you can. And when you need help and when you need that partner, reach out to somebody to make sure you've got what you need, because this is far too important to leave behind. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jordan. Hi there, I'm Nick Pritchard. I'm a cyber underwriter based in London and have been working with Zurich for the last 6 years. I'm here today to talk to you about how all of that important threat information that Jordan's just articulated translates into an underwriting strategy for Zurich around operational technology risk. So I'm going to talk to you about three specific things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about Zurich's general approach to cyber risk. Secondly, we're going to talk about the major focus areas for underwriters when reviewing OT security. And thirdly, what does good look like, and what does that mean for you in obtaining terms from Zurich? So first up, how do we approach cyber risk generally? So we collect exposure information, things like turnover information, geographical footprint, network footprint, and stock levels, and overlay a controls framework, and that generates a residual risk. We can then map that with our internal risk tolerances and risk appetite, and then provide a view on insurability, pricing, terms and conditions, and capacity deployment. So what's important for Zurich? As I've just mentioned, we overlay a controls framework to not only our IT security posture, but also to evaluate OT risk too. And the framework we use for both of those areas is actually the NIST framework, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So I'm going to talk about a handful of things here in the identify, protect and recover section, but happy to discuss other areas later on. So firstly, any good cybersecurity journey, whether it be IT or OT, begins with a strategy. And that begins with a clear understanding of your key assets and your key exposures. In order for you to develop that strategy, you need to understand what you need to protect. Next up, it's about restricting access to as few individuals or accounts as possible. As well as that, we need to ensure that the right people are only accessing the right information for the right amount of time. So using a privileged access management tool or privileged remote access solution, or using some of the capabilities associated with those tools can ensure that the right people are accessing the right information. On top of that, it's also around your approach to segmentation. So ideally for Zurich, that looks like a combination of firewalling, DMZs, and unidirectional gateways. And when we talk about segmentation, we're not only talking about those traffic flows from IT to OT, we're also talking about site-to-site connectivity as well. And from a recover perspective, we recognise that your IT environment is far more likely to be compromised than your OT environment, just down to its sheer scale and nature. So it's vitally important for us to understand whether your operational technology environment can actually operate or continue to operate in the event of an IT incident or an outage. But also some of those physical considerations. So have you considered your stockpiling requirements, any switching capabilities, and those capabilities in terms of redundancy at some of those sites? So what do those security controls mean for development of a strategy? I guess the first thing to note is that we observe and assess thousands of clients every year at Zurich, and they come across the full spectrum of firms. So firms starting off their journey, or they don't currently have a strategy around operational technology, all the way up to those companies that we've been partnering for a number of years based on their maturity and sophistication. It's worth reflecting where we are as well. So we accept that it's been an incredibly challenging time for insurers, brokers, and clients in terms of their cyber insurance journey across the last couple of years. But there are positive signs coming out of this, and there's a level of stabilisation. And in my opinion, this is down to an improved clarity of information exchange, but also an improved clarity around the strategy around what we do with that information. That as a result of that, Zurich are now in a position, and have been for some time, to actually reward and incentivize those most sophisticated clients with elements like increased capacity, flexible retention options, and pricing amendments. So what does good look like? What does sophisticated look like? And how does that differentiate themselves from the rest? I think aside from their approach to segmentation, access controls, and legacy exposure management, one of the key elements to this is actually having a centralized approach to the tracking, scanning, and monitoring of inventory. But above and beyond that, our clients aren't only telling us that they can do all these things, they're actually demonstrating them through things like their testing capabilities, but also OT-specific incident response and business continuity planning exercises. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that provides some greater insight on how we approach operational technology risk at Zurich from an underwriting standpoint. I guess the final message that I'd leave you with is that whilst we completely appreciate and recognise that there is often a level of hesitancy and concern around securing operational technology due to some very valid reasons like business dependency, the technicality of it, and how niche and nuanced it may be, that actually this doesn't need to be a muddied water. There can be a clear approach to managing this risk. And that doesn't need to be something incredibly specific. It can be applying some of those basic principles that you apply to managing your IT risk, but translating those into your OT environment. Thanks again for your time. I'm around for questions and answers at the end of the session, but I'm now going to hand over to Kelly Richards, who's going to talk about the role of claims in this. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Good morning, everybody. Just by way of brief introduction, my name is Kelly Richards. I've been at Zurich now for 9 years, and I head up the cyber claims team here at Zurich, working very closely with the likes of Aaron, Nick and Thomas, and of course Jordan along the way. I'm very, very conscious of time and want to make sure we leave enough time for Q&A at the end. So I'm just going to take a few minutes just to take a canter through effectively a suitably anonymised real life example of an incident which has been dealt with here at Zurich in the recent past. So I'll just whiz through these slides just by way of example. You can all read the various bullet points there, but essentially in this particular case, the customer Blogs Limited noticed that there were peculiarities, I guess, in the performance of their IT systems. Quite appropriately and correctly, they sort of immediately investigated that and discovered that there was an unauthorised third party at play in their systems, working to encrypt a number of local servers, including leaving a ransom note. Now, as we would expect in a situation like that, Blogs immediately implemented its cyber incident response process, which resulted in them engaging with us as insurers, as well as linking into a number of specialist third parties to assist primarily in the initial containment and from there remediation activities to get themselves back up and running. The internal leadership group was advised around the disruption and they were indicated that to expect various IT services would be impacted in the short to medium term. On further investigation, the attack itself was found to have actually been reasonably well contained to infrastructure within various local manufacturing sites, as well as a head office server. And the threat actor was actually discovered to have exfiltrated some data, although in this particular case it was fortunate that most of the exfiltrated data wasn't considered to be commercially sensitive, although it did include some personal information. If we move on, so we're probably now moving into this sort of 24 to 48 hour period beyond discovery, and the crisis response team was up to full steam acting in relation to the matter. Working with Blogs, the appointed expert suppliers, we were able to support them in making sure that they made the correct notifications to any impacted individuals that were affected, regulators, as well as getting in touch with customers that may notice changes in terms of delivery and contract delivery services. At that point, steps were taken to ensure that the situation itself was contained, and very importantly, that no further data was capable of being either exfiltrated or encrypted. At this point, Blogs took what is effectively a business and commercial decision that they chose to engage with the threat actor with a view to settling the ransom that had been delivered. But even in that particular situation, we were able to provide support by providing them access to specialist expert negotiators. And as you can see here from the slide, the overall kind of headline figure in terms of the ransom demand was north of €7 million. But with expert support and advice, that was actually significantly negotiated down and was ultimately settled at less than 40% of the initial demand. Finally, just moving on in terms of the longer term impacts that was encountered by this customer, the manufacturing processes themselves were relatively quickly brought back into operation, and the IT systems themselves were gradually brought back online. Overall total period of disruption was something in the region of 4 months, albeit after the initial discovery, actually the manufacturing processes themselves were brought back up to speed very, very quickly. One thing just to flag there is specifically around getting the manufacturing processes back up and running. The customer themselves had a number of, if you like, manual workarounds they were able to implement, which obviously meant they were able to get back up and running very, very quickly. The knock-on effect of that, though, was that that has had a necessary impact in terms of the costs of dealing with the disruption, because necessarily where robots had been disabled, etc., bringing in manual processes to work around had a knock-on effect in terms of the restoration costs. Following on from that, I suppose, having explained that the customer chose to meet the ransom demand, we ourselves were able to undertake necessary sanctions and regulatory checks, which enabled us to confirm to the insured we were able to indemnify them in relation to that ransom demand itself. And then going further, sort of longer term, forensic accountants were appointed to advise both us and Support Blogs & Co in calculating and pulling together information to calculate their business interruption losses, and that has very recently been settled and resolved. Looking forward and looking ahead, looking back to the impact in terms of the exfiltration of personal data, just to highlight here, we've engaged and kind of can continue to engage legal panel who were brought in very, very early in the process. They are now very, very focused on dealing with the impact and resolution of dealing with potential third-party claims which may arise out of this as a knock-on effect of the exfiltration of personal data.